What's happening, YouTube, Facebook, and any audio podcasting platform, whether it is Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts. And if you're tuning in on YouTube, greatly appreciate it. If you're tuning in on Facebook, greatly appreciate you. Ryan Thomas here answering one of the questions that I have been badgered with over the course of the last, I'd say, couple months that I felt the need to address and answer right here, right now on my channel. So, mixed martial arts, one of my favorite sports. It's a sport that I've covered on this show for the last, 6 years now, since 2016, since I started the show, the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. And mixed martial arts is obviously one of my passions. I enjoy the UFC. I enjoy boxing. I always have, dating back to, even when I was little, I really enjoyed boxing. Got into mixed martial arts over the course of the last, I'd say, 15 years. And from my wrestling days to just being a fan of the sport. And I remind you guys in the ticker below that for all combat sports coverage, you follow the podcast, the Thomas Take Sports Podcast, as I mentioned, and you'll hear fight predictions, pre and post fight reactions, and listen to yours truly, Ryan Thomas, play matchmaker for the winners and losers of all of these fights. And I love to play that matchmaking game. It kind of makes me feel like I'm the matchmaker, the Joe Silva or the Mick Maynard nowadays of the UFC. And it's always fun to discuss that. Born and raised in Buffalo, New York, Western New York. And for a long time, the sport of mixed martial arts wasn't even sanctioned in New York for me to go and attend a real pro UFC event. I had the opportunity to do that at UFC 210 when Daniel Cormier defended the UFC light heavyweight title against Anthony Rumble Johnson. And back then, we were in the midst of the Jones-Cormier rivalry. Conor McGregor had his rise, and Conor McGregor's had his peaks and valleys over the course of his career now, and wondering whether or not Conor McGregor can actually do it. Can he do it? Can he make this comeback? And a lot of mixed martial arts fans ask me this question, and I think it's a great question to ask because Conor McGregor, no doubt about it, put so many fans in this sport. He brought about a new era of fan to mixed martial arts, and I can attest to it because I was a fan of the sport back in 2005 from the first Ultimate Fighter season. And post that season, you'd be hard pressed if you were wearing a UFC shirt in your high school. Nobody knew what it was. I can attest to that. I wore those UFC shirts, those Affliction, those Tap Out t-shirts. Nobody really knew what it meant until they started to know what it meant. I wasn't allowed to wear the Tap Out shirts. My teacher said they were too violent for me to wear. So that was put to a stop pretty quickly. They didn't really get it. They didn't really understand it. Subject matter at hand, Conor McGregor's comeback, can he do it? And really, I think you got to go back to the beginning in order to talk about whether or not he can make this comeback. Because gone are the days of being a world title contender. Right now, he's on the outside looking in. The last fight he fought, he hurt his leg in a fight against Dustin Poirier. Poirier, the winner of that fight, he gets a title shot against Charles Oliveira, and Poirier comes up short. So Conor McGregor's last fight is a loss against a guy that just lost a fight for the title. So you're on the outside looking into the 155-pound division. As active as Conor is in social media, you see a post of Conor's recent physique, you'd be startled. You'd say, wow, this guy's gotten so big, so strong. I think, to be honest with you, the comeback is one thing, but where is the comeback going to take place? Is it going to take place at 185 pounds? Is it going to take place at 170 pounds? More likely 170 than anything, but Conor McGregor looks like he is close to 200 pounds right now. And 200 pounds, of muscle, 200 pounds of big, a lot of work has been put into that body over the course of his rehab to his leg. He's built up his upper body. And kind of changing that physicality to get back to what he was as a 155er, that's going to take even more time. So I will speculate right here, right now, that I think when Conor does come back to fight, whenever that may be, that it will be at 170 pounds rather than at 155. And I think that that is warranted because 170, there's a lot of fun matchups for him, and older. Cutting weight is very hard to do on a regular basis, let alone once you're older to lose that weight. Your metabolism slows down. You can't burn the calories the way that you could before at the younger age because your metabolism was firing, constantly putting fuel in. The fuel's burned. It's almost as if the fuel never existed with how fast your metabolism can run up until you're, 25, 30 years old. So, Conor's beyond 30, on the wrong side of 30, you could say, going into, I'd say he's still in his prime, but he's in the mid, pushing the mid 30s rather than the early 30s, 33, 34, 35, maybe by the time he fights again, 34, somewhere in that range. But first off, I want to say too, like, so many fans are at a point where they feel like Conor has no shot at ever being what he once was. There's a select few guys in this sport, especially in the sport of mixed martial arts or combat sports in general, that can really galvanize their talent and really put themselves on this stratosphere, trajectory. Muhammad Ali was one of them in boxing. Mike Tyson was one of them in boxing. Sugar Ray Leonard was one of them in boxing. Roberto Duran, you could throw in there too. And I mean, there's so many guys. Manny Pacquiao most recently, Floyd Mayweather most recently. Rare talents, intriguing talents that just shot up to the moon based on their ability and really their self-belief. And Conor McGregor is one of those guys as well. George St. Pierre is one of those guys. John Jones, guys that were literally made to fight, made to be a part of combat. And I think when you have a guy like that, knowing that he was able to dig deep and have that hunger strike of wanting to be, a champion, he made the sacrifices. We know the story. He didn't have much money. Dee Devlin, his girlfriend at the time, now his wife, Dee McGregor, she made sacrifices too so that he could train and do all that. Gone are those days. Those days are long gone. So the mentality that Conor used to have, being this hungry fighter on the come up, trying to make it, is gone. That version of him is long gone. There's no getting it back because you're not in the same spot that you were in, when this whole journey started. So for any of the fans that feel like, oh, he's just got to go back to the beginning, there's no going back to the beginning. He will never be able to replicate what he did before, because that was a different time. He was a different person, different status in life. I think what has to happen in order for him to go back to where he was is to somewhat give himself a little bit of a reality check that I certainly am afraid that he's just not willing to do. Why did he lose those fights against Dustin Poirier? How did he lose those fights against Dustin Poirier? Why did he lose the fight to Khabib? How did he lose to Khabib? And just looking in the mirror and saying, I lost those fights to Poirier. I lost those fights to Khabib. Water under the bridge. Khabib's gone. Poirier, we'll get you back at some point. But what's the next point in my career to get me back in line for those opportunities to take on, a Poirier again and right that wrong of that third, trilogy fight to get that fourth fight that I think Dustin Poirier is avoiding. View that I've watched with Poirier doesn't seem to really want that fight. And I think Poirier is looking at it like, how is that a good business move for me when, I beat the man. I beat the guy. I don't have to, do this again because I made the money and I beat him 2 out of 3 times. What's really left for me to do there? And I think I could honestly agree with him there, but I think mainly to get that self-belief back, that's something that will never leave you as a human, to put yourself back in that mental headspace. I think if anybody could do it, it is Conor, because Conor did it through unprecedented circumstances. The only thing that makes it difficult is that those unprecedented circumstances are gone. So how do you replace those circumstances to reinvigorate that mindset? And I think you got to do it by fueling the fire, fueling the fire of doubters, fueling the fire of quote unquote haters, as the kids call it these days. There are so many people that are rooting for Conor McGregor's demise, rooting for his failure prior to his failure, rooting for McGregor to make a bad mistake that, yes, he eventually went on to make in a few cases. So that motivation factor of most people are counting me out. Most people think I'm done. Most people think I'm finished. Most people think that I can't do it. Only a true champion in this sport from any era would understand what it takes to go from zero to hero the way that he did. From nothing to something to everything is the line. And I think that he can do it. The question is, can he look himself in the mirror and admit that, yeah, he was vulnerable? Yes, he did lose. And now he's got to bounce back. That's the part that I question, because Conor is such a magnetic personality that I don't think he can bring himself to believe that he could ever lose, even when he has. The Nate Diaz loss, the first Nate Diaz fight, when he lost that fight, taking that fight on 11 days notice, as Nate Diaz did as well. He wanted that rematch right away. He labeled it pretty much a lottery win, a fluke. Really, it wasn't. It was a loss. We saw it. He was in there. Nate definitely was on the winning end of it. I think that's partially what makes Conor great, but in this state of his career, that's actually working to his detriment. That competitive mindset that I can never lose when he already has lost is something that I think makes him a streaky competitor, but is something that I think falsifies the reality of his career. And the reality of his career is simple, and it's easy to comprehend. You hit a hungry fighter with nothing. You give a hungry fighter with nothing, he will find the glory. You give him the glory, he has everything. Where's the hunger? That's the reality of it. Can he do it? There are a select few guys that can take a hiatus from the sport, like George, like John, Anderson, like Conor, that could come back and really mentally galvanize that winning mentality that got you the wins, the belt, the gold, the glory, the fortune, the fame in the first place. I'm rooting for it to happen. I think it'll be a great story. Whether it does remains to be seen. What weight will it happen? Charles Oliveira has reinvigorated his own career at 155 pounds. Kamaru Usman, I'm not quite sure how much longer he has left. He's hinted at retirement at 170, walking away as the champ. It's going to be very interesting to see where Conor McGregor returns and who he returns against. I know for one thing, I would love to see him fight Nate Diaz in the trilogy. I think that would be very, very fun for obvious reasons. But anytime McGregor's in the cage, it's must-see TV. No doubt about that. I'm Ryan Thomas. Thanks for tuning in. Fight fans, subscribe.